Violet Harper had walked this hallway countless times before, but today the familiar click-clack of her heels felt foreign. The office, once her second home, now seemed alien, each cubicle a reminder of what she had lost. It was 9:30 a.m., the usual bustle of the office underway, yet Violet's heart was heavy with an uncertainty she had never felt in all her 84 years. For 47 years, Violet had given McKinnon and Turner Corporation her heart and soul. She had worked tirelessly through the years, rising from a young secretary with dreams of a stable life to the esteemed office manager, a position that commanded respect. The company had grown alongside her, expanding from a small, quiet firm to a giant in the industry. Through it all, she had been there, a constant, a symbol of loyalty, hard work, and dedication. But now, that loyalty, that dedication felt like a distant memory. The cold office lights flickered above her, their hum like the ticking of a clock, each passing second amplifying the sickening knot forming in her stomach. She had been called to HR, just a routine meeting. At least that's what they told her, yet something felt off. Her hands trembled slightly as she grasped the handle of the office door, but she steadied herself, reminding herself that she had faced far worse in her life. Violet had weathered countless storms, the death of her husband, the painful loss of friends and family over the years, the constant juggling of work and home. But this felt different. This was a betrayal she never saw coming. "Miss Harper?" The voice of Sarah, the young HR manager, snapped Violet out of her thoughts. The door was already ajar, and Violet stepped inside, her heart sinking as she saw Sarah's face. Sarah was young, probably no older than 30, with an efficiency in her demeanor that Violet had always admired. But today, Sarah's eyes were downcast, her lips pressed into a tight line. "Please, take a seat." Violet did as she was told, the chair beneath her creaking as she lowered herself onto it. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded neatly on her lap, the same way she had always presented herself to others. She had learned early on that grace was a woman's best armor, especially in the face of adversity. The silence in the room grew heavier with each passing moment, a palpable weight between them. Violet's mind raced, but she kept her face neutral, unwilling to let Sarah see the storm brewing inside her. Sarah cleared her throat before speaking again, and Violet knew immediately this was not going to be a simple conversation. "Violet, I'm afraid we've made some difficult decisions regarding staffing and—" Violet's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the rumors. The company had been downsizing, cutting costs, replacing older employees with younger, more affordable workers. But Violet had never believed she would fall victim to the very machine she helped build. She had always been a model employee, meticulous, dedicated, never asking for more than what was fair. She had weathered the years of corporate restructuring, budget cuts, and even the late-night work sessions, sacrificing her time and energy to ensure McKinnon and Turner thrived. Yet here she was, facing the unimaginable. "You're letting me go." Sarah's gaze dropped. She didn't say it outright, but Violet didn't need her to. The silence spoke volumes. Violet could feel the blood rushing to her head, her pulse thudding in her ears. She asked, "Why?" The word coming out as more of a whisper than a question. She couldn't bring herself to raise her voice. The truth was too heavy, too bitter. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair, avoiding Violet's eyes. "Violet? The company's restructuring, Violet. They've made cuts across the board, and your position has been deemed redundant. You're being let go as part of that process."
Redundant. The word hit Violet like a slap in the face. She was a relic, a part of the company's history, now deemed unnecessary, dispensable. The shock was almost too much to bear. She had spent 47 years in this office, 47 years of her life, and this was how it ended? Just like that? Her career, her identity, her loyalty reduced to a mere line item on a spreadsheet? The weight of the years she had dedicated to this company crashed over her in a wave of disbelief. Her hands clenched into fists, the tightness of the grip forcing her to focus. She could feel her chest tighten, but she refused to let the tears fall. Not yet. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but her words thick with emotion. "I've worked here longer than most of you have been alive. How can you tell me I'm redundant?" Sarah looked uncomfortable, her eyes flicking to the door, as if hoping someone would come to her aid, but no one did. Violet knew Sarah wasn't the one making the decisions. She was just the messenger, the one who had to deliver the news that tore Violet's world apart. Her lips parted, as if to say something, but she seemed to lose her words. She glanced at the paperwork in front of her, unsure how to explain the unexplainable. "The decision came from the top," she said, her voice wavering. "This is corporate restructuring. It's nothing personal." Violet's mind raced. Nothing personal? That was the cruelest lie of all. How could this not be personal? For 47 years she had devoted herself to McKinnon and Turner. She had given it everything. Her loyalty was unwavering, her dedication unquestionable. Yet here she was, being discarded like an outdated piece of equipment. So that's it then. 47 years of service, gone in an instant. No recognition, no appreciation, just nothing? Sarah, looking increasingly uncomfortable, nodded. "I'm afraid so. The company has made its decision, and there's nothing more I can do." Violet stood up, her legs shaky but her back as straight as ever. She looked at Sarah one last time. "You should be ashamed." Her voice trembled, but she said it with such finality that Sarah flinched. Violet turned her back on the young woman and walked out of the office. The sound of her shoes against the marble floor seemed to echo louder as she left the HR office behind, the weight of the betrayal sinking deeper with each step. As she walked back to her desk, she could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her. Some watched with pity, others with guilt, and a few simply stared, unsure what to say. The reality of the situation was too stark to ignore. The company she had spent nearly half a century building was letting her go without so much as a second thought. Her desk, once a place of pride where she had handled the office's busiest days and hardest decisions, was now just another empty space. The photos of her family, the awards she had received, and the mementos she'd accumulated over the years all seemed to mock her. They were symbols of a life well lived, but now, in this moment, they felt like relics of a time that no longer mattered. The pain was sharp, but Violet did not let herself cry. She gathered her things slowly, methodically, one last time. She had been here for 47 years. She had seen the highs and lows, the struggles and successes. She had witnessed the growth of a company she had helped build. And yet it all came down to this, a cold, corporate decision to cast her aside like an outdated piece of equipment. Violet's hands trembled as she reached for her coat, but she paused. The finality of it all hung in the air like a thick fog. There was no going back now. This was the end of an era. And yet, in that quiet moment of reflection, Violet knew that this wasn't the end of her story. Her story was far from over. Over the next few days, Violet and Charles worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. Violet's recollections of company meetings, offhand remarks from the CEO about streamlining the workforce, and the subtle but unmistakable undercurrent of ageism in the office all began to take shape into a bigger picture. Violet's memories came flooding back as she dug through her old company emails and documents. She found records of other employees, people who had been quietly let go, many of them around her age or older. Some of them had left with severance packages that were shockingly small, not nearly enough to support them in their golden years. Charles dug deeper, reaching out to former employees, some of whom were willing to speak to him on the condition of anonymity. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. McKinnon and Turner had been systematically pushing older employees out,
replacing them with younger, less experienced workers who would accept lower wages. But there was more, much more. Charles uncovered an internal memo buried deep within the company's HR records, detailing the company's strategy to refresh its workforce and align with the modern corporate climate. The memo included language that was chillingly familiar to what Violet had been told during her firing. Older employees are becoming a financial liability. Streamline operations for a younger, more agile workforce. When Charles showed Violet the document, her face drained of color. They planned this. Her voice was low, barely a whisper. They've been planning this for years. Charles nodded grimly. It's not just you, Violet. They've been doing this across the board. And if we can prove it in court, we can make them pay for what they've done to you and to so many others. Violet's heart was heavy with both anger and disbelief. She had worked her entire life for this company, poured everything into it, and yet this was how they repaid her loyalty. Her entire career had been reduced to a mere calculation on a financial spreadsheet. But now, for the first time in a long while, Violet felt the flicker of something stronger than betrayal: justice. As the days went by, Violet began to feel the weight of the case settle onto her shoulders. The pressure of standing up against a corporation as powerful as McKinnon & Turner was immense. But each time she thought about giving up, she remembered her final words to her colleagues, the words that had left them speechless. Don't let this place define your worth. She couldn't let it define hers. Her final day at the office was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it had also given her something invaluable: courage. Courage to speak out, courage to fight back, and most importantly, the courage to demand the respect she had earned. And as the case gained traction, Violet began to realize something else. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every older worker who had been discarded, every loyal employee who had been cast aside in favor of profits. She wasn't going to let McKinnon & Turner get away with it. Not on her watch.
The days after Violet's meeting with Charles Sullivan felt like a blur. The weight of the case, the mounting evidence of age discrimination, and the pressure to expose McKinnon & Turner for what they truly were had consumed every thought. Yet there was a sense of purpose growing in Violet, an energy she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer just a retired office manager. She had become the voice of the silent victims of corporate greed. Charles, ever the strategist, had immediately gone to work. He sent requests for information, subpoenaed company records, and reached out to former employees willing to testify. He was methodical and relentless, driven by a sense of justice that matched Violet's own. Together, they were an unlikely team: a woman in her 80s whose voice had been ignored for too long, and a lawyer with a fierce dedication to righting corporate wrongs. But what they uncovered in the weeks following Violet's firing was even more damning than they could have imagined. The first breakthrough came when Charles managed to track down an anonymous whistleblower who had worked in McKinnon & Turner's HR department for over a decade. The whistleblower, who refused to be named for fear of retaliation, provided Charles with a treasure trove of documents, emails, memos, and internal spreadsheets that revealed the true extent of the company's practices. One email stood out in particular. It was dated just a few months before Violet was fired, addressed to the CEO and senior executives of the company. The email detailed a plan to refresh the workforce by gradually phasing out older employees, replacing them with younger talent who would fit better into the modern corporate culture. The memo even outlined a strategy to manage the layoffs, suggesting that the company provide minimal severance packages to employees over 60 in order to keep costs low. Charles leaned back in his chair after reading it. His face was grim, his jaw clenched. "This is systematic," he muttered under his breath. This wasn't just a one-off decision. Violet wasn't just unlucky. She was targeted. Violet, who had been sitting across from him, listening intently, felt a cold rage settle in her chest. They planned it. Every single one of them. They knew exactly what they were doing. Her voice was steady, but filled with disgust. And they thought they could just get away with it. Charles nodded. "It gets worse." He handed her another set of documents.
I managed to get my hands on some financial statements from the last 2 quarters. McKinnon and Turner's profits have been dropping, and in the midst of that, they've been cutting jobs, especially among their older employees. And it's not just Violet. I found at least 10 other cases like hers. Violet's heart sank. She hadn't realized how widespread the issue was, how many others had been affected by the same cold corporate strategy. "How many people's lives have they ruined?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "More than we can count," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But we're going to make sure the world knows what they've done."
As the investigation gathered momentum, Charles worked tirelessly, preparing for the inevitable showdown with McKinnon and Turner's legal team. He reached out to other former employees who were willing to testify, employees who had suffered in silence for years, afraid of speaking out against the company that had employed them for so long. Some of them, like Violet, had quietly watched as the company made decisions that seemed to prioritize profits over people. Others had been directly impacted by the layoffs and felt betrayed by the same system they had worked so hard to build. Through these interviews, a disturbing pattern emerged. McKinnon and Turner, under its new leadership, had been systematically replacing older employees with younger ones, pushing them out under the guise of corporate restructuring. The company's executives had been using euphemisms like refreshing the workforce and aligning with modern trends. But at the heart of it all was a simple truth: they wanted cheaper workers. Charles began to notice something else, something that disturbed him even more than the age discrimination itself. There were hints of financial manipulation and deceit. Internal emails revealed that senior executives had been using their power to suppress whistleblowers and protect themselves from legal scrutiny. In one email, a high-ranking HR executive had suggested the company get rid of any older employees who might be a liability to avoid any potential future lawsuits. And the memo advising the executives to cut severance packages for older employees was the smoking gun. "This is bigger than we thought," Charles said one night as he pored over the documents. "Violet's case is about more than just wrongful termination. This is corporate fraud." Violet sat beside him, her mind racing. She had spent so many years building her career at McKinnon and Turner, believing that the company shared her values: honesty, loyalty, hard work. But the truth she was uncovering now made her sick to her stomach. "They're a machine," she said, her voice thick with disbelief, "and I was just another cog to them." Violet and Charles began preparing their case with a renewed sense of urgency. They knew that bringing McKinnon and Turner to justice would be no easy task. The company had deep pockets and a team of top-tier lawyers, but Charles was determined. "We have the truth on our side," he reminded Violet time and time again, "and truth is a powerful weapon." But the weight of the battle was starting to take its toll on Violet. Her health, which had been declining for years, seemed to worsen with each passing day. She found herself growing tired more quickly, and the stress of the legal proceedings was beginning to wear on her. She had always been a fighter, but now there were moments when she questioned whether she had the strength to carry on. Still, there was no turning back. Violet had come too far to give up now. The idea of letting McKinnon and Turner walk away from this unscathed was unbearable. If she had to fight until her last breath to ensure that the company paid for its wrongdoing, then so be it. In the midst of all this, something unexpected happened. A former colleague, Hannah, who had worked with Violet in the accounting department for over 20 years, reached out to her. Hannah had left the company years ago and they had lost touch, but now Hannah had a message that would change everything. "I've been talking to some of the old team," Hannah said over the phone, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "I've been hearing things. You're not the only one they've done this to, Violet. They've been systematically pushing out everyone who's been there for too long. I know people who were told to retire early, offered paltry severance packages. They've been paying off older employees to keep them quiet, but I've heard whispers that there's even more going on. Fraud, embezzlement. It's all tied to the layoffs." Violet's heart raced. "Hannah, what are you saying?" she asked, the urgency in her voice clear. "I'm saying you're on the right track. They've been covering their tracks, Violet. But there's a trail, and I think I can help you find it." Charles and Violet met with Hannah the following day, and what she revealed was nothing short of explosive. "I have documents," Hannah said, sliding a thick folder across the table, "stuff I've kept hidden for years, and I'm ready to help you bring them down." Violet's breath caught in her throat. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the moment we've been waiting for."
The days leading up to the trial were filled with intense preparation.
Charles, Violet's determined lawyer, worked tirelessly to build the strongest case possible. The evidence they had gathered, the whistleblower testimony, the internal documents revealing the company's predatory practices, the hidden financial records showing the extent of McKinnon and Turner's manipulation, was more than enough to prove their case. But Charles knew this fight was far from over. McKinnon and Turner had deep pockets, and their legal team would not back down easily. The corporation would do everything in its power to cover up its wrongdoings and discredit Violet's claims. Despite the stress, Violet felt a sense of quiet determination settling over her. "I may be 84, she told Charles one afternoon as they sat in his office reviewing the case files, "but I'm not done yet." Charles smiled, proud of her resilience. "I think we both know that." The day of the trial finally arrived. The courtroom was filled with tension as the legal teams from both sides prepared for what promised to be a grueling battle. Violet, though weary from the toll this case had taken on her health, felt a quiet strength rising within her. She had lived a long, full life, and though this was the hardest fight of her life, she wasn't backing down now. Violet sat in the witness stand, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was no longer the quiet, gentle woman who had once worked diligently behind the scenes at McKinnon and Turner. Today, she was a force to be reckoned with. Her voice, steady but powerful, rang out as she recounted the 47 years she had spent at the company. "I've given my life to McKinnon and Turner," Violet said, her words filled with the weight of decades spent working long hours, often sacrificing personal time and family moments for the sake of the company. "I was loyal. I was there when the company struggled, and I was there when the company thrived. I dedicated everything to that place, and they just tossed me aside like I was nothing." Her voice cracked slightly, but she held her composure. She knew this moment was about far more than just her personal story. It was about every employee who had been wronged, every older worker who had been discarded. This was her opportunity to make sure their voices were heard. Across from her, the defense team, hired by the McKinnon and Turner, exchanged wary glances. Their job was clear: to discredit Violet and downplay her claims. They were up against a woman who had lived through decades of corporate politics, and they knew they had to tread carefully. The defense attorney, a sharp-looking man in his mid-40s, stood up and began his cross-examination. "Miss Harper, you've stated that you were let go as part of the company's restructuring, correct?" Violet nodded. "And you've also stated that the company treated you unfairly, that they have been systematically replacing older employees, correct?" Violet's eyes narrowed. "That's right." The attorney paced in front of her. "But isn't it true, Miss Harper, that the company was simply making strategic decisions to ensure its survival? That in today's competitive world, older employees often require higher salaries and benefits? Isn't it just business?" Violet shook her head firmly. "It's not just business. It's manipulation. It's exploitation. You can't call it business when it's at the expense of people's lives." The courtroom was silent for a moment. Even the judge seemed taken aback by Violet's calm yet forceful response. The defense attorney, now visibly frustrated, tried another angle. "But Miss Harper, you're not the only one who has been affected by the company's changes, are you? There are many employees, younger employees, who have benefited from this restructuring. People who have been given opportunities because of the company's decision to adapt. You're just one part of the bigger picture." Violet's eyes flashed with a sudden sharpness. "I'm not just one part of the bigger picture," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I am the picture. I helped build this company. I was there when it was small, struggling, and I worked just as hard when it was thriving. I didn't just sit in an office and watch it grow. I made it grow. And now you're telling me I'm disposable? You're telling me my loyalty, my service, my entire life's work doesn't matter?" The defense attorney fell silent for a moment. The emotion in Violet's words was undeniable, and the jury was listening intently.
Just as the defense attorney was about to resume his questioning, there was a sudden interruption. The courtroom doors swung open, and the journalist who had first uncovered McKinnon and Turner's dirty secrets walked in, holding a stack of papers. "Your Honor," the journalist called out, her voice strong and clear, "I have evidence that will change the course of this case." The judge looked up, her eyebrows raised. "Miss Harris, this is highly irregular. You are not a part of this trial. Please take a seat." But the journalist wasn't deterred. "I have internal documents and emails from McKinnon and Turner that prove the company's long-standing practice of age discrimination. I've uncovered proof that the company has been systematically eliminating older employees to save money, and that this practice has been going on for years." The defense attorney leapt to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay." But Violet's lawyer, Charles, stood up calmly. "Your Honor, these are not just hearsay, these are irrefutable documents. Records that show a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond Miss Harper's case. We ask that you allow this evidence to be entered into the record." The judge paused, looking between the two legal teams, then nodded. "The court will allow this new evidence." The journalist walked forward, handing the documents to the judge. As the judge began to read, the tension in the courtroom grew. The jury leaned in, eager to see what would happen next. The case continued for several more days, but the tide had already turned. The evidence was irrefutable. McKinnon and Turner's high-ranking executives had knowingly and systematically pushed out older employees to save on salaries and benefits. The whistleblower testimony, the internal documents, and the witness statements had all come together to expose the company's corporate malpractice. The jury deliberated for hours, and when they returned, the tension in the room was unbearable. Violet, sitting in the witness stand, could hardly breathe. The judge stood, and the courtroom went silent. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Violet Harper. McKinnon and Turner Corporation is ordered to compensate Miss Harper for wrongful termination, including damages for emotional distress and lost wages." The gavel came down, and a wave of disbelief swept through the room. Charles Sullivan, his face triumphant, turned to Violet and smiled. "You did it." Violet, her hands shaking but her heart swelling with pride, nodded. She had done it. Justice had been served. In the days that followed, McKinnon and Turner faced a public relations nightmare. The company was forced to admit to its role in the discrimination, and several high-ranking officials were forced to resign. The case set a precedent for age discrimination lawsuits, and companies across the country began re-evaluating their practices. Violet's case became a symbol of resilience, not just for herself, but for every older worker who had been cast aside by the corporate world. She received recognition from various advocacy groups, and her story was covered by news outlets across the country. But perhaps the greatest victory of all came when Violet received a letter from a former employee, someone she had worked alongside for many years. The letter simply read, "Thank you for standing up. You've given all of us a voice. We'll never forget you." Violet smiled softly as she read the letter. She hadn't just fought for herself. She had fought for every worker who had been pushed aside, discarded like yesterday's news. And in the end, that was more important than any victory. How many of us would stand up for what's right if it meant risking everything? And what happens when we finally find the courage to speak the truth?